following Chalk Talk is brought to you by Isolite, the emergency lighting experts. Stay educated, my friends.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Greg Keel along with Matt Bird. As you can see, our topic is going to be how to size an inverter. We had a lot of success on Tuesday with folks that joined us and going over this. As a reminder, this is a 15-minute chalk talk. So this is a little bit of a teaser exercise that Tom, our host, is going to go through. But if you need more information and more help specifying Isolite inverters, reach out to us. Tom will have our contact information here at the end. But this is a really great topic to join us for and learn a little bit about. And Tom's going to go over it and has a lot of information. So with that, I'll hand it off to Tom. And thanks again for joining us for our Chalk Talk.
Thanks, Greg. And a quick reminder for everybody that the chat and Q&A are open, so if you have any questions, go ahead, post them in there, and we will get everything answered for you at the end of the presentation. All right, so as always, we're going to do this in 3 parts. First, I'm going to do a little bit of overview, sort of set the stage for what we're really talking about here. We're going to see there's a couple different starting points when you're trying to size an inverter or specify or build out an inverter, and we're going to go over some of those different starting points, and I'm going to sort of lead you from there in how you might proceed trying to specify an Isolite inverter. Then I'm going to dig specifically into one of those starting points, which is specifying an inverter specifically from a panel schedule. And then finally, I'll just go over some of the resources we have available for you guys to help you through this kind of stuff. All right, so here's the different starting points. The first and absolute easiest is a direct call out for an Isolite inverter. You might see in the prints that they are requesting an Isolite E3 Mac, yada yada, and they're going to give you a full build out of exactly what you want. Job's done. Perfect. We love that when the engineers understand just how amazing Isolite inverters are, and they just go ahead and throw those in the prints. And then for us on our end, we don't really have to do any work. We just go and throw out a quote for that. The next easiest would be a cross. So perhaps they have specified a specific inverter in the plans, but it's a different inverter than an Isolite inverter. So you can see that sort of listed in the first picture to the left here. So at the bottom it says they would like a light alarms number 6 LFTM yada yada. And what we can do then is we're going to take the cut sheet for that product. We're going to go to Light Alarm's website. We're going to find this number 6 that they have, and then we're going to fully look at the build out, and we're going to pull up an Isolite spec sheet, and we're going to say, oh, okay, 5-year maintenance plan. Then we're going to see the Isolite code 5-year maintenance plan. Oh, okay, this many amp breaker, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to just compare the builds based on the names. So that's the next easiest starting point we have when we're trying to figure out what sort of inverter we're putting on the job. Next is sort of a something that maybe is a little bit on the side of what you're trying to do. Maybe it doesn't fully give you all the information you need, but it is something that's going to help you specifically when it comes to which options you're going to want with your inverter. That is going to be a written spec. So our job, at least from where we sit, when we see a written spec, is going to be to go through it and to first of all find it through potentially hundreds of pages worth of documents and find something that looks like sort of what you see on the bottom here. Central battery equipment for emergency lighting. That's our section that describes an inverter. It could look like anything. Perhaps they're calling it a UPS system. It's not a UPS system. It's an IPS system, but maybe that's a song for another time. But a lot of times they will be called UPSs in here. They'll be called all sorts of different things. Sometimes these specs can be a little bit outdated. And it's our job to go through and to mark whether we are complying, whether our inverter is doing the things the spec is asking, or whether maybe they're asking something that is potentially, maybe they're asking the wrong question, and we can go ahead and mark that and let them know, well, we deviate from it in this perspective, but this is something that will work out totally fine for this job, or we take exception to it and we say, well, no, it looks like you're asking for something that I simply can't provide here. Just going to let you know that the inverter doesn't do that thing. And sometimes, on the back end, it still works out, because for the most part, these inverters are pretty similar and they're going to perform essentially the same function. So an Isolite, for example, through E3 Mac inverter is going to do whatever you need it to do for any emergency lighting scenario. It will work. Anyway, the next step would be if you have blueprints, and that's what we're going to specifically talk about today. But there's a couple different ways, specifically when we're discussing if there's a panel schedule attached in the prints or not. So when we don't see a panel schedule, there is still a way to specify an inverter. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the floor plans and you're going to notice where the luminaires are, and you're going to count up all of the luminaires, hopefully marked EM for you, or if not, you're going to have to determine which luminaires should become emergency luminaires. And then you're going to go where there's hopefully a fixture schedule, and you're going to take the wattage of the fixtures you see there and multiply it by the amount of those fixtures you have, and then add all that up and size an inverter from there. So if you have maybe 10 watt fixtures, now you know you need at minimum a 100 watt inverter. Finally, the last way is through a panel schedule, and you'll see this is something that's super easy. A lot of you are probably super familiar with this, and a lot of this will be review, but there's definitely some of us out there that could benefit from seeing how to specify an inverter from a panel schedule. We're going to talk about that, and then after that I'll talk about some of the nuances with just sizing an inverter in general and what you want to look at. But first, let's discuss specifying an inverter from a panel schedule. And the first point I want to make is that inverters are basically electrical panels, or another way to put it is that they contain an electrical panel. They have output breakers and an input breaker, basically the same way that any electrical panel does. Sort of similar to generators, in regards to generators will have to have the same thing. They'll have to have those breakers. The difference is this is all self-contained within the Isolite unit. So say if you're going with a generator, you need to consider all of the different gear associated with that generator. There's going to be a lot of breakers and different transfer switches and stuff you need to consider when it comes to a generator. With an inverter, on the other hand, all of that stuff is baked in, and you're going to order all of those breakers, which will relate to one output circuit per breaker, and you're going to specify all of that up front when you order the inverter. All right, so let's read these prints here. I have a little example here for us. Let's read these prints for any of us who aren't familiar or don't spend a ton of time reading prints. This is the first page here. We found it. Great. Nothing valuable on this page so far. What we want to try to find is a panel schedule. That's really the good stuff. That's what gets us to specifying an inverter the quickest. So we're going to scan the document, and a little helpful hint, typically it's going to be at the bottom. It's going to be some of the last pages on the prints. Oh, voila, we found it. Wonderful. So this is a panel schedule. This is what it looks like. You're going to see all of these little boxes, and well, I think I see one that looks like it might have the emergency circuits on it. So let's go ahead and zoom in on that. Ah, yes, ELP probably stands for emergency lighting panel. Let's find out. I'm going to look at the circuits themselves, and I see EMLTG. That's a great sign. That indicates emergency lighting. So each one of those circuits is going to be one of the output circuits on our inverter, and it's awesome because we have found all of the emergency lighting. We can notice here on the left, ELP house 3, it looks like they're running a sub panel off of this panel. So let's go ahead and look at that and make sure it's all really emergency lighting stuff. And we look, and all of the circuits on house 3 are all called EMLTG, emergency lighting. Perfect. It was well labeled for us. We know we have all of our emergency lighting now. Great. So let's take this information and translate it to an inverter. We see the voltage. That's something we need to know. Awesome, 480-277. We know how to specify our inverter with that. We know we need a three-phase inverter. And then from there, we're going to need to know what size inverter we need, and then also how many output breakers we need. Output breakers, we're going to scan this document, and it looks like you can see some circuits are on the left and some are on the right. For anyone not familiar with how to specifically read one of these things, they break the circuits up to the left and the right for the sake of space. And so if you look right at A right here, you can see 1.26 kVA of load for circuit 1, and right next to it there's another 1.26 that actually relates to circuit 2 on the other side. Sort of how they do it there. You see 1.3 relates to circuit 3, 0.5 relates to circuit 4. So a little bit of a complicated way if it's your first time looking at it to read these things, but that's essentially how it works. So what's the relevant information we have left? Output breakers. Let's see. Looks like we have 6 here, and I've go ahead and notice if you look back, we had 5 on this separate panel. So we're going to sort of ignore that they broke this up into 2 panels. All we need to know is that we have 11 output breakers worth of emergency lighting circuits, and we're going to just translate that to an inverter and give ourselves 11 output breakers on that inverter. We can also see that they want some spare breakers. So to me, what that means is we're going to max out the inverter. It probably can't handle many more than the 11 we're looking for, but we're going to fit as many output breakers as we can into that inverter. And then the absolute most important piece of information, especially since this presentation is called sizing an inverter, is what size E3 Mac in this situation should we go for. And if we look at the bottom, we can see the total load is 11.45 kVA. So we're looking at somewhere around 12, but we should really size this thing up to give ourselves a little bit of extra leeway. Let's go ahead and turn this panel schedule into an inverter. So the first place we're going to go is to the cut sheet for the E3 Mac. And I have sort of an example of it listed here. This is what the cut sheet looks like. E3 Mac, and the next thing in the string is going to be the size. I think we should go with a 15 kVA. We could go with this 12.5 kVA. Technically, that would work. However, we do have kVA, so it would translate. If you had watts, you need to include the power factor of those fixtures. So 12.5 would work, but it's typically going to be better to size to about 1.2 and then round up if you can. So 15 kVA, when we round up just a little bit like that, is going to allow the device to run for years and years longer than, for example, if we went with a 12.5. So the way that these inverters work is that as the batteries degrade over time, what's really reducing is the runtime. So if you have a 15 kVA inverter with 11.5 kVA of load, that's probably going to run for much longer than 90 minutes, maybe 130, 140 minutes. Over time, that amount of minutes is going to slowly decrease. So maybe in a decade or even 2 decades, if you go with the 15 kVA, you still are exceeding 90 minutes. Once you dip under 90 minutes, you no longer have a code compliant system. Also, it's safer to round up because they might try to add an additional circuit in the field. They might have to add more load. Perhaps they ended up switching the luminaires to be something that takes a little more power, and it just tends to be a little bit safer. With that being said, it probably would be somewhat reasonable to go with a 12.5 if that's the direction you wanted to go with on this job. Anyway, we know we need 3-phase. We saw that listed in the panel schedule. LC is just our regular battery option. We're going to go with IGOG because in the panel schedule it notated 277/480 volt. So that's good. And then from there we know everything we need to know. The only other thing is breakers. It looks like we can fit a maximum of 12 breakers, so we'll give them 1 extra slot. And then in terms of options, we didn't have a written spec for this job. That's typically where you see options listed, but we do know that typically maintenance bypass is that one option that is typically ordered and typically requested on most jobs. So we're going to throw in maintenance bypass there as well. And we have just specified an inverter from a panel schedule. I want to mention there's some additional considerations. This job ended up being pretty simple, but there can be a little bit more to it, specifically when we discuss motor loads. So if somebody's trying to run a storm shelter, or if they have any sort of an exhaust fan or an elevator or any sort of motor load, you need to consider that, because motors tend to have a high inrush current, and our inverters can handle some inrush. In fact, a decent amount, industry leading. However, it's not unlimited, and a lot of times if those motors don't have any soft start or inrush limiting capability, then we'll have to go ahead and size up the inverter. For example, if we have a 3.5 kVA fan going onto it, we might need a 10 kVA inverter just to run that fan if it doesn't have soft start. Typically, it's going to be cheaper to figure out on the back end to specify the soft start capability on the motor when we're ordering it. So make sure, especially if you're an engineer and you're in that position, try to do that to save a lot of cost here. And from there, the only other thing really is 2-hour run times. We need to think about that. Really simple. If you're trying to run your inverter for 2 hours instead of an hour and a half, which is code, then you're going to just multiply your total load for 90 minutes times 1.33 or something similar to that, maybe a little bit higher if you want to be extra safe, and that'll get you your total for 2 hours. So super simple there. Also consider that these documents, they're not always perfect, so you might see a little bit of contradiction when you're trying to read this stuff. Just sort of take things a little bit with a grain of salt. Try to sort of check yourself if you think the information is posted in a couple different places on the prints, which a lot of times it is. Sort of cross-reference all of those different informations. Try to scan the entire document, or at least the stuff that's relevant on that document. And the only other consideration is options. Maybe they want trip alarms, or maybe they want that maintenance bypass explicitly. Typically, you're going to go with factory startup. That's going to extend the warranty from 2 to 3 years. We always include factory startup on our quotes. And there's a couple other options on there. It's just important to know not to get stressed out by options, because not all of those options are really required for the inverter. I want to mention that we have a resource center on our website, and we have a little section on that resource center called Helpful Documents, a subsection called Inverter Guides, if you need any additional help with inverter stuff. And if not, you can always reach out to us. As always, there will be a follow-up link that will be emailed to you guys with a link to this presentation, as well as the PDF for it. And as I mentioned, we're here to help you guys out. Should you have any questions with this, reach out to me, tdeutsch@isolite.com, or any of us. We are here to assist you. Thank you.